had no idea that a single wrong turn would alter the entire course of my life. The morning had started like any other. A checklist of meetings, a podcast on financial trends humming through my Bluetooth, and my usual cup of black coffee from the sleek machine in my penthouse kitchen. I was en route to a high-profile real estate summit, an exclusive gathering where millionaires rubbed shoulders, closed deals, and plotted bigger plays. I was one of the keynote speakers, set to unveil a multi-million-dollar development in the heart of downtown. But somewhere between the highway exit and my confident self-assurance, my GPS lost signal. I found myself on a narrow country road surrounded by nothing but endless fields, silence, and sky. It wasn't long before my luxury sedan, the one with hand-stitched leather seats and a monthly maintenance fee higher than most people's rent, began sputtering. First came the flicker on the dashboard, then the loss of power steering, and, finally, the slow, pitiful death of the engine. I coasted to the side of the road, muttering a few choice words. No signal, no nearby buildings. Just rows of golden wheat waving gently in the wind, almost mocking my helplessness. I climbed out, heels sinking into gravel, and popped the hood like I knew what I was doing. Truthfully, I hadn't opened a car hood since college. I was a millionaire, real estate developer, not a mechanic. I didn't fix things, I hired people to fix them, but today there was no one to call, and that was terrifying. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps crunching over dirt and stones. I turned and saw him. He looked like he had stepped out of a different century. Battered jeans, a dusty button-down, sun-beaten skin, and a straw hat pulled low over steady, kind eyes. He carried a wrench in one hand and a faded rag in the other, you know. "All right there, ma'am?" he asked, voice calm, unfazed. Everything in me wanted to retreat, to remain guarded. I'd built my empire on instinct and strategy, and this man didn't fit any of the categories I was used to. But something in his tone disarmed me. "My car broke down," I said, "and I have no idea what's wrong." He walked over without hesitation, set his wrench down beside the car, and peered under the hood like he'd been born doing it. For a few moments he didn't speak, just examined, adjusted, listened. Then with a nod, he got to work. No tools except the ones he'd brought, no fancy diagnostics, no fuss. I watched as he worked, sweat glistening on his forehead. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime solving real problems. Problems you couldn't talk your way out of. "You know a lot about cars?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He chuckled. "When you can't afford a mechanic, you learn fast." That answer struck me harder than I expected. There was no bitterness. In his voice, just truth. Within 30 minutes, the car coughed back to life. I was stunned. He wiped his hands, closed the hood, and stepped back with a quiet pride. "You should be good to go now," he said, brushing dust from his hands. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp 100, and extended it toward him. "Here, please, take this." He looked at it, then looked at me, and shook his head. "No, thank you. I didn't do it for money." That answer confused me. Everyone wanted something. People didn't just help others out of the blue, not in the circles I moved in. But he wasn't finished. "Besides," he said, "you looked like you needed help more than I needed cash." For a moment, I didn't know whether to feel insulted or humbled. But looking into his eyes, I realized he wasn't talking about the car. He saw something in me I hadn't even acknowledged in myself. I was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally. Years of boardroom battles, 90-hour work weeks, high-stakes negotiations, it had all taken something out of me. Something I hadn't noticed until a stranger on a dirt road held up a mirror. "Do you live nearby?" I asked, trying to regain my footing. "Just over the hill," he said, pointing to a modest patch of trees in the distance. "My wife's cooking lunch. You're welcome to join." Everything in me screamed no. I had deadlines, a speech to give, a reputation to maintain, but something else, something softer, quieter, said yes. I followed his rust-covered truck down the dirt path until we reached a small farmhouse tucked between a vegetable garden and a chicken coop. Children's laughter echoed from the back. A dog barked once and then flopped into the shade. His wife, Grace, stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron and smiling like I was an old friend. They welcomed me in like family. We sat at a rickety table patched with duct tape and wood glue. The food was simple: cornbread, garden vegetables, something simmered in a pot I couldn't name, but it was the best meal I'd had in years. We didn't talk about money, or success, or the world I came from. We talked about harvest seasons, hard winters, raising kids, fixing broken fences, and the joy of building something with your hands. I listened more than I spoke. There was no Wi-Fi, no marble floors, no security systems, but there was warmth. Real warmth. And for the first time in years, I felt grounded, present, human. As I got back into my car to leave, Elijah walked me to the road. "Thank you," I said, hesitating, "for the help and for the reminder." He nodded. "Sometimes, when everything breaks down, it's life giving you a new direction." I drove away in silence, his words echoing in my mind. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, stuck on a rural road, rescued by a man with calloused hands and a quiet spirit, was the beginning of the greatest transformation of my life. The road back to the city felt longer than before. Though my car now hummed smoothly beneath me, my thoughts were far from calm. Elijah's words, "When everything breaks down, it's life giving you a new direction," echoed louder than the luxury jazz on my stereo. That night, I stood before a crowd of investors and power brokers, delivering my keynote like a machine. I wore my sharpest suit and flashed my practiced smile. They clapped at all the right places, nodded at the numbers on the screen, and praised the expansion plan I unveiled. But inside, I felt hollow. Every applause felt fainter than the laughter of Elijah's children around their kitchen table. I had millions in my accounts, towers in my portfolio, and accolades filling an entire office wall. Yet none of it felt alive. That was the moment I realized I'd mastered building structures but never nurtured roots. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about that farmhouse, the vegetables still growing outside, the faded curtains, swaying in the breeze. I looked at my glass-walled office in the clouds and wondered when I stopped appreciating simplicity, when more became a goal instead of enough. On impulse, one Sunday morning, I drove back to the countryside. I didn't call ahead. I wasn't even sure they'd be home. But as I turned off the highway onto that familiar dirt road, I saw Elijah outside, repairing a wooden fence with slow precision. He looked up and grinned. "Didn't expect to see you back this soon," he said, as if we were old friends. "I didn't expect to come back either," I replied honestly. Grace welcomed me again with a warm meal, this time with homemade peach cobbler that nearly brought me to tears. I stayed longer than I meant to. Hours passed like minutes. We talked about the land, about crops, about how his family barely scraped by each season, but somehow still found joy. I listened to how they reused everything. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. Then I asked, something I hadn't planned to, "Elijah, have you ever thought about expanding?" He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean turning this farm into something sustainable. A business. A model others could learn from. Organic produce, local distribution, community-supported agriculture. You have everything here, except resources." He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "But I don't have the capital, or the know-how. I know the soil and the seasons. But banks don't lend to dreamers with calloused hands." That hit me deep, because I used to be one. I returned to the city with a fire I hadn't felt in years, not for real estate, but for something real. I went through my books, liquidated some minor assets, and quietly created a small private fund. Not to invest in luxury, no. This was for something humbler, more honest. I called it Project Harvest. Within a month, I presented Elijah with a partnership offer. I didn't want to buy his farm. I wanted to build with him. At first, he was hesitant. "You're "A city millionaire," he said. "Why would you want to help a poor farmer like me?" "Because," I told him, "you reminded me what wealth is really about." Together, we sketched a plan. We'd start small: more crops, a greenhouse, solar panels, a barn repurposed as a learning center. We'd teach young farmers sustainable practices. Grace would run a farm-to-table kitchen where visitors could learn how to cook straight from the earth. We hired no fancy consultants, just hardworking locals. Elijah trained them personally. I handled the paperwork, permits, logistics, branding. We balanced each other perfectly, and slowly, Harvest Hill, as we came to call it, began to grow. I traded power lunches for garden gloves. Instead of giving presentations under LED spotlights, I spoke to kids about photosynthesis while chickens clucked in the background. My heels were replaced by boots. My soul, once weary, found peace in the rhythm of planting and nurturing. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were weeks where rain ruined our entire crop. Times when investors scoffed at the idea of backing dirt and idealism. Some friends called me foolish, said I was throwing away prestige for passion. But I didn't care because I saw the smiles on the faces of people who once felt invisible now being part of something bigger. I saw children who had never tasted a tomato that wasn't from a can bite into a sun-warmed one, juice dripping down their chins, and I saw Elijah, this man of soil and silence, stand taller each day, pride replacing the years of quiet struggle, etched into his face. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a wooden bench we'd built ourselves, he turned to me and said, "You saved this place." I shook my head. "No, you saved me." Because it was true. Elijah didn't just fix my car. He reminded me that success isn't about towering over others. It's about lifting people with you. It's about legacy, not luxury. Purpose, not prestige. I still owned real estate. I still had money. But now, I had meaning. When a powerful millionaire's luxury car breaks down on a quiet country road, he doesn't expect help, especially not from a confident, grease-streaked black woman running her own roadside repair shop. She's brilliant, bold, and refreshingly unbothered by his wealth. As sparks fly between them, he begins to fall for her strength and kindness. But just when he's ready to confess his feelings, he notices a ring on her finger, a ring that changes everything. Is she taken? Or is there more to her story than meets the eye? What begins as a simple act of kindness turns into a moment of deep connection, secrets, and emotional twists that will leave you breathless, a heartwarming tale of unexpected love, resilience, and the truth hidden behind a golden band. 3 years after that day my car broke down on a country road, I stood at the center of what had become a living testament to transformation. We were hosting our first annual harvest gathering, a community celebration bringing together farmers, families, educators, and dreamers. Over 1,000 people had traveled from across the state to visit what used to be a forgotten patch of land. From the small hill overlooking the farm, I could see everything. Children running between hay bales, teenagers leading tours through the learning center, volunteers guiding elderly guests through vegetable patches. Grace's kitchen buzzed with laughter and the smell of fresh bread, and a local choir sang beneath a handmade wooden arch that read, "From Soil to Soul." Elijah sat next to me in his wheelchair, a blanket across his lap and a wide smile on his face. He turned to me slowly, voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined this. Not in my wildest dreams." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Neither did I. Because how could I have predicted that a mechanical failure on a lonely road would be the beginning of my greatest calling? People still call me a millionaire. Some now say billionaire thanks to my investments and the growing value of the sustainable empire we've built, not just at Harvest Hill, but across 5 new partner farms inspired by its model. But that title feels so small now. What am I? Really? I'm a woman who traded perfection for purpose, wealth for meaning, concrete towers for green hills, and most importantly, I became a bridge. I bridged the gap between worlds that never spoke before, between rural wisdom and urban ambition. between old scars and new starts, between people who had been forgotten and the power to change everything. The best part? It wasn't me alone. It was Elijah, who believed in the power of soil when the world had long dismissed it. It was Grace, who turned every meal into a ministry of healing. It was every boy who thought he'd never be more than his broken home, and every girl who thought poverty would define her forever. One young woman stands out. Her name is Maya. She arrived at Harvest Hill as a volunteer, escaping an abusive household. Shy. Barely spoke a word. But give her a seed, and she'd treat it like treasure. She tended plants like they were sacred. She learned fast about composting, irrigation, nutrition. Soon she began teaching others. Today she runs her own section of the farm and mentors a group of teen girls who remind her of who she once was. She told me last week, "For the first time in my life, I feel safe. I feel like I belong." That, to me, is the richest return I've ever received. We expanded our mission to include scholarships, microloans for small-scale farmers, and mobile food trucks delivering fresh produce to food deserts across the state. I used to pitch sky-high towers to investors. Now I pitch rooftop gardens to public schools. And you know what? The world listened. We've been featured in sustainability summits, educational conferences, even UN forums on food equity. But my proudest moment wasn't being on a global stage. It was when a 6-year-old boy handed me a tomato he grew himself and said, "I made this for you." Because that's when I knew. The cycle had completed, from wealth to ruin, from ruin to redemption, and now, legacy. But I want to be honest. It's not perfect. There are still setbacks, floods, budget crunches, even criticism. Some still question our motives. Others try to imitate the model without the heart. And yes, I still sit in boardrooms when needed. I still navigate high-level financial strategy. I haven't abandoned who I was. I've simply realigned it. I've learned that your past is not your prison. It's your preparation. And your true wealth? It's what survives after you're gone. Not the zeros in your bank account, but the lives you lifted. Not the empire you built, but the earth you restored. Not the applause of strangers, but the tears of those you helped heal. As the sun dipped below, the trees that evening and the fields of Harvest Hill glowed golden one last time, Elijah turned to me and said, "You were never just passing through. You were meant to be here." And he was right, because when my car broke down, I thought the universe had failed me. But it hadn't. It had saved me. It stripped away everything artificial so I could remember what was real. And if you're listening to this, if your plans have collapsed, if your road has twisted into places you never meant to go, don't panic. Maybe your breakdown is your breakthrough. Maybe the roadblock isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning. Because the richest harvests don't come from the seeds we plant in perfect conditions. They come from what we're brave enough to sow when everything looks barren. So go ahead. Break down. Ask for help. Let humility in. And when you rise, because you will rise not just with wealth in your hands, but with purpose in your heart. Because that, my friend, is the only kind of success that truly lasts.